This story is titled, My Fiance's Mother Insisted on Living with Us After the Wedding, then started redecorating our house while we were at work. Her next move made me call off everything. I never thought I'd be sitting in my car at midnight, staring at the house I bought just 8 months ago, wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life by letting my future mother-in-law move in. Watching the lights flicker in what used to be my home office, now transformed into her meditation room, I realized that the woman I initially thought was just an overbearing mom with boundary issues had a much darker agenda. What I discovered that evening changed everything, and looking back, I should have seen the red flags from the beginning. But when you're in love, you tend to overlook things that seem obvious in hindsight. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Sarah, 29F, and until 3 months ago, I was living my best life with my fiancé Michael, 31M. We'd been together for 4 years, and everything was perfect, or so I thought. I'm a pediatric nurse, and he works as an architectural engineer. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and it was love at first sight. Michael was everything I'd ever wanted, kind, ambitious, and seemingly independent. Then there was Patricia, 58F, Michael's mother. When I first met her 2 years ago, she seemed like a sweet, albeit slightly clingy, widow who just wanted the best for her only son. She lived in a small apartment across town, and would visit us once or twice a month for Sunday dinners. Nothing too intrusive, right? Looking back, I realized she was just biding her time, carefully orchestrating her plan. The problem started shortly after Michael proposed. Patricia's lease was conveniently ending around our wedding date, and she started dropping hints about how lonely she was living alone, how unsafe her neighborhood had become, how much money she could save by moving in with us, how she could help with future grandchildren. The suggestions were subtle at first, but they grew more frequent and intense with each passing week. I can still remember the knot in my stomach when Michael brought up the idea of having his mother move in with us, temporarily, after the wedding. He assured me it would just be for a few months until she found a new place. The way his eyes pleaded with me, filled with that mixture of hope and anxiety, how could I say no? After all, this was the man I loved, and I wanted to prove I could be a supportive wife. But as I sit here now, watching the shadows move across our front yard, I realize that sometimes the most destructive forces in our lives don't come wielding weapons or making threats. Sometimes they come bearing gifts, speaking sweetly, and calling you, sweetheart, while systematically dismantling everything you built. What I'm about to share isn't just a story about a controlling mother-in-law. It's about manipulation, betrayal, and the length some people will go to maintain control over their children's lives. And trust me, what happened next made my blood run cold. The first week after Patricia moved in seemed deceptively peaceful. She brought with her an antique vanity mirror, several boxes of old photo albums, and what she called her essential oils collection. At the time, I thought nothing of it when she asked to store some of her things in the basement, claiming they were family heirlooms she couldn't part with. If only I'd known what those boxes really contained. My first real glimpse of trouble came when I returned home from a particularly exhausting 12-hour shift to find my carefully cultivated herb garden had been completely uprooted. In its place were rows of lavender plants, Patricia's favorite. When I confronted her about it, she smiled that syrupy sweet smile of hers, and said she was just trying to improve the feng shui of our backyard. Michael, of course, saw nothing wrong with it. Mom's just trying to help, honey. And lavender is known for its calming properties. Calming properties? I needed more than lavender to calm my nerves when I discovered she'd rearranged our entire kitchen while we were at work. Every cabinet, every drawer, completely reorganized according to her more efficient system. My grandmother's vintage cookware, which I'd proudly displayed on the open shelves, was now buried in the back of a bottom cabinet, replaced by Patricia's collection of Moroccan tea sets. But the real breaking point of that first month wasn't the physical changes to our home. It was the subtle way she began inserting herself into every aspect of our lives. She started joining us for dinner at our favorite restaurants, showing up at our regular Sunday brunch spot, and even tried to accompany us to our wedding venue tours. The woman was everywhere, always armed with an opinion and a passive-aggressive comment about my choices. My best friend Jenny, 28F, was the first to notice something wasn't right. During one of our rare lunch meetups, rare because Patricia had somehow convinced Michael we needed to spend more family time together on weekends, Jenny pointed out how I had stopped laughing as much. How I seemed to be walking on eggshells in my own home. She wasn't wrong. The wedding planning became a battlefield of subtle power plays. Every decision I made was countered by Patricia's suggestions. My dream of a small, intimate garden ceremony was met with her insistence that Michael had always wanted a grand church wedding. The funny thing? In all our years together, he'd never once mentioned wanting that. But suddenly, under his mother's influence, he couldn't imagine getting married any other way. I started documenting everything in a journal, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was the problem. But as I filled page after page with incidents and coincidences, a pattern emerged that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a case of an overprotective mother struggling to let go. This was calculated, methodical. Then came the day I discovered my home office had been transformed into what Patricia called her meditation sanctuary. I came home early from work with a migraine to find my desk, my files, everything I needed for my occasional night shifts at the hospital had been moved to the basement. In their place were crystals, meditation cushions, and an overwhelming amount of incense. The walls, previously a calming sage green, were now painted a bright purple, her favorite color. When I called Michael in tears, his response chilled me to the bone. "Mom said you agreed to it last week. Didn't she discuss it with you?" No, she hadn't. But apparently, she'd told Michael that we'd had a long heart-to-heart about how I wasn't using the office enough, and how it would be better utilized as a spiritual space for the family. That night, as I sat in our bedroom trying to make sense of it all, I heard Patricia on the phone through the wall. Her words were muffled, but what I could make out made my blood run cold. She was talking to someone about Phase 2, and how everything was going according to plan. I wish I could say that was the worst of it. But Patricia was just getting started, and what I discovered next would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the woman who was supposed to become my mother-in-law. That mysterious phone call about Phase 2 kept nagging at me. I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperation can make you do things you never thought you would. After tossing and turning all night, I decided to investigate those boxes Patricia had stored in our basement. I know, invasion of privacy and all that. But something about her recent behavior made me feel like I was running out of time. I waited until both Michael and Patricia were out. She convinced him to take her shopping for wedding supplies at some boutique 2 hours away. The basement was humid and dimly lit, and Patricia's boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, labeled with her precise handwriting. Family memories, holiday decorations, and personal items. What I found inside those boxes made me physically sick. The first box contained dozens of printed emails and handwritten letters between Patricia and Michael's ex-girlfriends' families. Not just one ex, but 3 different women who dated Michael before me. The letters detailed how Patricia had systematically driven each woman away, using the same tactics she was using with me. Move in, redecorate, create tension, and eventually force a breakup. But that wasn't even the worst part. The second box contained detailed notes about me. Everything from my work schedule to my favorite foods, my allergies, even copies of my private medical records that she must have somehow obtained from her friend who worked at my doctor's office. There were photos of me running errands, meeting friends, even sleeping in my own backyard. She'd been studying me like a scientist studies a lab rat, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The third box nearly made me drop everything and run. It contained what looked like some sort of contract, already filled out but not yet signed, for a house just 3 blocks away from Michael's childhood home. The contract had both Michael's and Patricia's names on it, dated for 1 month after our planned wedding date. Next to it was a brochure for a holistic wellness retreat, a fancy name for what looked more like a psychiatric facility, with my name written on top and dates circled for what would have been our honeymoon week. My hands were shaking as I dug deeper. I found a small notebook with Patricia's daily observations about my behavior, her strategies for isolating me from friends and family, and her plans for after the wedding. She had it all mapped out. First, convince Michael I was having mental health issues due to wedding stress. Then, suggest I needed time at the retreat to recover. While I was away, they would move to the new house, leaving me to return to what exactly? As I sat there surrounded by evidence of her elaborate scheme, a new message notification popped up on my phone. It was from an unfamiliar number, but the content made my heart stop. Sarah, you don't know me, but I'm Rachel, 32F, Michael's ex-fiancée from 6 years ago. We need to talk. Patricia didn't just try to drive me away, she succeeded. And what she did afterward nearly destroyed my life. I barely had time to process this when I heard the distinct sound of the garage door opening upstairs. They were back early. As I hastily shoved everything back into the boxes, trying to make it look undisturbed, I noticed one final detail that made everything click. A small notebook had fallen behind some old boxes. Inside were journal entries dating back 20 years, all in Patricia's handwriting, detailing her obsessive need to control Michael's life, her deep-seated fear of abandonment, and her plans to ensure no woman would ever take her son away. Racing upstairs, my mind was spinning. I had evidence now, but what good would it do? Michael was so deeply under his mother's influence that he probably wouldn't believe me even if I showed him everything. And if Patricia realized I knew the truth, well, those medical records and that wellness retreat brochure suddenly seemed a lot more sinister. I needed a plan, and fast. But with Rachel's message burning a hole in my phone and Patricia's footsteps echoing through the house above me, I realized this was about to become a lot more complicated than just a difficult future mother-in-law. Meeting Rachel felt surreal. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere Patricia wouldn't think to look for me. I told Michael and Patricia I was picking up an extra hospital shift, and Patricia's satisfied smirk when I mentioned working late made my skin crawl. She probably thought her plan was working, that I was desperately trying to escape the tension at home. Rachel looked nothing like I'd imagined. Professional, put together, with kind eyes that carried a hint of residual trauma. The first thing she did was slide a thick manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents that mirrored what I'd found in Patricia's boxes, but these told the aftermath of her story. 6 years ago, Rachel had been exactly where I am now. The same love story with Michael, the same perfect relationship, until Patricia moved in, temporarily, after their engagement. But Rachel's story took an even darker turn. After discovering Patricia's manipulation, she confronted Michael with evidence. His response? Complete denial. Patricia had spent years crafting her son's psychological dependence on her, and Rachel's accusations only pushed Michael further into his mother's arms. What happened next sent chills down my spine. Rachel described how Patricia had systematically convinced everyone in their social circle that Rachel was unstable. Small things at first, misplaced items, scheduled appointments that Rachel supposedly made but had no record of, rumors about erratic behavior at work. It culminated in Rachel finding herself briefly hospitalized for an alleged nervous breakdown, one that Patricia had carefully orchestrated by gradually spiking Rachel's tea with anxiety medications that made her appear unstable. The truth only came out months later, when one of Patricia's friends had a crisis of conscience and confessed to helping her obtain the medication. But by then, the damage was done. Rachel had lost her job, many of her friends, and worst of all, her reputation in their small community. She'd had to move across the state to rebuild her life. As Rachel spoke, my phone kept lighting up with texts from Patricia. Each one made my blood run colder. Sweetheart, I noticed you've seemed stressed lately. I have some lovely calming tea that might help. Michael and I are worried about you working so much. Maybe we should discuss reducing your hours after the wedding? I took the liberty of scheduling you a massage at that wellness center I mentioned. They have excellent therapists. Looking at those messages now, knowing what I knew, each one felt like a carefully placed landmine in Patricia's psychological warfare. The tea, the concern about work, the wellness center. It was all happening again, exactly as it had with Rachel. But Rachel had given me something she never had, preparation. She documented everything after her escape from Patricia's web, building a case that she'd never used out of fear and exhaustion. Now she was giving it all to me, along with a warning that made my heart race. She'd recently discovered that Patricia had done this to not just us, but to every serious girlfriend Michael had ever had. Some had escaped. Others had been completely destroyed. As our meeting drew to a close, Rachel grabbed my hand and said something that would guide my next actions. Patricia doesn't just want to control Michael's life, she wants to erase any woman who might take him away from her. And she's gotten better at it each time. You're not just fighting for your relationship, Sarah. You're fighting for your life as you know it. Driving home, my mind was racing with possible escape routes. But then my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number that changed everything. "I'm Susan, 61F, Patricia's former best friend. There's something you need to know about what happened to Michael's father. It wasn't an accident." Just when I thought I'd uncovered the full depth of Patricia's darkness, it seemed there was an even deeper layer waiting to be exposed. And suddenly, this wasn't just about saving myself, it was about saving Michael too. Meeting Susan felt like stepping into the past. We met at her small house on the outskirts of town, where every surface was covered with photographs from the 80s and 90s. In many of them, I could see a younger Patricia, standing beside a tall, kind-looking man I recognized as Michael's father from the few photos Michael had shown me. Susan's hands trembled as she pulled out a dusty photo album from beneath her couch. The story she told me made everything else I'd learned about Patricia seem like child's play. 25 years ago, Patricia and Susan had been inseparable friends, and Susan had witnessed the early years of Patricia's marriage to Michael's father, James. According to Susan, James had been planning to leave Patricia, concerned about her increasingly controlling behavior toward their young son. He confided in Susan about Patricia's obsession with keeping Michael away from other children, her rage when James would take Michael on father-son trips without her, and her elaborate lies to family members about James being an unfit father. The day before James's fatal car accident, he'd told Susan he was meeting with a divorce lawyer. He'd gathered evidence of Patricia's psychological manipulation and was seeking full custody of Michael. The next morning, his car went off a bridge on his way to work, a route he'd driven safely for 15 years. The investigation ruled it an accident, but Susan had always suspected otherwise. She'd seen Patricia tampering with James's car the night before, claiming she was checking the oil. Susan's voice cracked as she revealed the detail that had haunted her for decades. She'd found a receipt in Patricia's purse for brake fluid, dated the day before the accident. She'd kept quiet all these years out of fear of Patricia's influence in their small community, fear of not being believed, and fear of what Patricia might do if she knew Susan suspected the truth. But what pushed Susan to finally reach out to me was seeing history repeat itself. She'd been watching from afar as Patricia orchestrated her move into our house, recognizing the same pattern she'd seen decades ago. The systematic isolation, the subtle manipulation, the calculated moves to maintain control over her son's life. Susan had even noticed Patricia befriending a local pharmacist, the same tactic she'd used before gaslighting Rachel. As I sat there processing everything, my phone buzzed with a series of texts from Michael. "Mom's really worried about you, babe. She says you've been acting strange lately. Maybe we should postpone the wedding until you're feeling more like yourself? Mom knows a great therapist who could help." Each message confirmed what I now knew. Patricia's influence over Michael was complete, and she was already laying the groundwork to paint me as unstable. Just like Rachel. Just like every other woman who had gotten too close to taking her son away. But then Susan showed me something that changed everything. An old letter from James to Michael, written the day before his death, explaining why he needed to get them away from Patricia. Susan had found it in Patricia's belongings years ago and kept it, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone strong enough to finally break Patricia's cycle of control and destruction. As I held that yellowed envelope in my trembling hands, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about saving myself anymore. It wasn't even just about saving Michael. This was about justice, for James, for Rachel, for all the women Patricia had destroyed, and for the little boy who grew up believing his mother's lies. I carefully tucked James's letter into my purse, my mind already forming a plan. But as I drove home, I noticed Patricia's car following me in my rearview mirror. Had she somehow known about my meeting with Susan? And if she did, what was she planning to do about it? The next 24 hours would change everything. What I didn't know then was that Patricia had already set her final plan in motion, and I was running out of time. I spent the night in a hotel, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. The letter from James felt like it was burning a hole in my purse. My phone kept lighting up with increasingly frantic messages from both Michael and Patricia, but I couldn't risk going home, not yet. I needed to think, to plan my next move carefully. One wrong step, and I could end up like Rachel, or worse. The next morning, I made two crucial decisions. First, I scanned every document I had, James's letter, Rachel's evidence, Susan's photos, everything, and sent copies to Jenny and my lawyer. If anything happened to me, at least the truth would come out. Second, I decided to confront Patricia directly, but on my terms, not hers. I drove home mid-morning, knowing Michael would be at work. As expected, Patricia was there, calmly arranging flowers in the kitchen as if she hadn't spent the night bombarding my phone with manipulative messages. The look on her face when I walked in, that split-second flash of anger before her mask of motherly concern slipped back into place, told me everything I needed to know. Before she could speak, I placed James's letter on the kitchen counter. The color drained from her face as she recognized her late husband's handwriting. For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia was speechless. That's when I laid out everything I knew, about Rachel, about the other women, about James's plans to leave her, about the brake fluid receipt Susan had found. Patricia's transformation was terrifying to witness. The mask of sweet motherly concern crumbled completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. She didn't deny anything. Instead, she told me, with chilling calmness, that no one would ever believe me. That she'd already convinced Michael I was having a mental breakdown. That she'd been documenting my erratic behavior for weeks. That she had friends in the hospital administration who would back up her claims about my deteriorating mental state. Then she made her final play. She pulled out her phone and showed me dozens of photos she'd taken without my knowledge, me meeting with Rachel, talking to Susan, even sleeping in my hotel room the night before. She'd been tracking me all along, building her case. She told me I had two choices. I could leave quietly, ending the engagement and disappearing from Michael's life forever, or she would destroy me just like she had the others. What Patricia didn't know was that I was recording everything on my phone, hidden in my jacket pocket. But just as I thought I had the upper hand, we heard the front door open. Michael was home early. The next few moments seemed to unfold in slow motion. Patricia's face transformed back into its mask of maternal worry. She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to spin some tale about my unstable behavior. But for once, I was faster. I hit play on the recording, and Patricia's own voice filled the room, her threats, her admission about tracking me, everything. Michael stood in the doorway, keys still in hand, as his mother's true nature was finally exposed. The look of devastation on his face as he heard her speaking about James's death, about her systematic destruction of his past relationships, about her plans for me, it was heartbreaking. But what happened next showed me exactly why Patricia had been able to maintain her control for so long. She started crying. Not just crying, sobbing hysterically. Suddenly, she was on the floor, weaving a story about how she'd done it all for him, how she couldn't bear to lose another person she loved, how James had been planning to take Michael away from her. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, and for a moment, I saw Michael wavering. That's when I pulled out James's letter. And as Michael read his father's final words, something inside him finally broke free. The next few hours were a blur of emotions and revelations. Michael read his father's letter 3 times, his hand shaking more violently with each reading. The letter detailed not just James's plans to leave Patricia, but his desperate wish for Michael to know the truth about his mother one day. It was filled with a father's love and fear that Patricia's influence would shape his son's entire life if he didn't act. Patricia's mask finally shattered completely. As Michael confronted her with questions about his father's death, she became someone I'd never seen before. Rage and desperation poured out of her in waves. She alternated between screaming that she'd done it all for love and threatening to destroy everyone in the room. When Michael mentioned calling the police about his father's death, she lunged for my phone, still recording everything. The next moments happened so fast. Patricia grabbing the phone, Michael trying to stop her, the sound of shattering glass as they knocked over the china cabinet. In the chaos, Patricia started gasping and clutching her chest, crying out about her heart. Even then, I couldn't be sure if it was real or another manipulation. As a nurse, I couldn't take the chance. I called 911. The paramedics came, and with them, the police. Patricia was taken to the hospital, where doctors confirmed she'd had a panic attack, not a heart attack. But her trip to the hospital opened another door we hadn't expected. The police were very interested in her connection to a recent case involving stolen prescription medications from the hospital where she'd been getting her calming tea ingredients. In the days that followed, everything changed. Michael, with the support of a trauma therapist, began to process not just the recent revelations, but a lifetime of manipulation. The police reopened the investigation into James's death, particularly interested in Susan's evidence about the brake fluid receipt. Rachel and the other women Patricia had harmed came forward with their stories, creating a pattern of behavior that couldn't be ignored. I canceled the wedding, but I didn't leave. Michael asked me to stay, not as his fiancé, but as someone who helped him see the truth. He needed time to heal, to understand who he was outside of his mother's influence. I understood that. I needed time too. We both started therapy, separately and together, learning to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of truth rather than manipulation. Patricia was eventually charged, not for James's death, as too much time had passed to gather concrete evidence, but for the prescription medication theft and fraud. The investigation also revealed she'd been forging documents and stealing medications to use in her manipulation of Michael's past girlfriends. She's now serving time, writing letters to Michael that he chooses not to read. 6 months later, I sit in our newly redecorated house, all traces of Patricia's improvements long gone, watching Michael plant new herbs in what used to be the lavender garden. He's different now, stronger, more independent, finally free of the fog his mother had kept him in for so long. We're taking things slowly, rebuilding our relationship one honest conversation at a time. Rachel, Susan, and the other women Patricia hurt have become an unexpected support system. We meet monthly, sharing stories and healing together. There's something powerful in knowing you're not alone, in turning a shared trauma into shared strength. Yesterday, Michael found an old photo album in the basement, pictures of him and his dad that Patricia had hidden away. As we looked through it together, he smiled and said something that made me realize how far we've come. "You didn't just save me from my mother, Sarah. You gave me back my father." Sometimes love means having the courage to shatter someone's illusions, even when you know it will hurt them. Sometimes it means standing firm in the face of manipulation and lies. And sometimes it means being patient enough to help someone rebuild themselves after their whole world has been turned upside down. Michael and I don't know what the future holds for us. But we do know one thing: whatever we build together will be based on truth, not manipulation. And that's worth more than any wedding or house or picture-perfect family facade could ever be.